Okay, so we are starting a new unit, and this unit is ecology. So our essential question is, how can change in one part of the ecosystem affect change in the other parts of the ecosystem? Our learning targets, there's 3 of them. I can describe the levels of ecological organization. I can explain the transfer of energy in a food web, and I can explain how humans impact the environment. Okay, and as we move over here, let's go to this little setup, and we're going to start with the first thing, which is, what do we want to sort of get out of this? What are some of the key concepts? Well, one is the interactions within and among populations. The next one is the nitrogen cycling with energy flow through the ecosystems. So for that, we'll talk about like food chains and food webs. And the third one is the effects of the natural events and human activities on the ecosystem. So that would be like the negative and the positive feedback that happens. All right. So what is ecology? Ecology is the scientific study of interactions between organisms and their environments, focusing on energy transfer. It is the science of relationships. So really it's the interaction between living and non-living things. What do we mean by an environment? The environment is made up of 2 factors. Biotic factors, these are all of the living organisms that inhabit the earth, and abiotic factors are all the non-living parts of the environment that are going to be on this planet. So like temperature, soil, water, air currents, stuff like that. The levels of organization, if we start at the bottom with an organism, or sometimes we called it an individual, and then we go to population, and then the populations are going to mix in with all other populations. It becomes a community. And then once we throw in all of the non-living aspects, we would now say that that is an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is the living and non-living aspects, and then biosphere is the part on Earth where life is going to exist. So if we look at an organism or an individual, it's any unicellular or multicellular form exhibiting all of the characteristics of life. We would call it an individual. It's the lowest level of organization. Population is the next. This is a group of organisms. Once they start to mate, of species living in the same area at the same time, they can interbreed. They can compete with one another for food and mates and shelter. The next level, because there's 5 levels, is a community. This is several interacting populations that inhabit a common environment and are independent. In other words, we're not the only, creatures that walk this planet. We also have a bunch of other living organisms that populate the earth. So when we add all those populations together, we make a community. An ecosystem, populations in a community, and then we now add the abiotic factors and see how they interact together, because you know that we can't go without water. Water is essential for our life. It's in our foods. We bathe with it, and so it's essential for life. And we know that even just being on land, there's the soil that helps with the plants, that helps to give us food. And so we really can't live without that non-living part of our environment. And the biosphere is the life on Earth that is going to life-supporting portions of Earth composed of air, land, fresh water, and salt water. It's our highest level. It's really the part of Earth where life exists. So we did have a mnemonic to help you remember that. And that mnemonic, if you remember from last year, was Isabella picks corn every birthday, or Isabella picks cake every birthday. If we go into a habitat versus a niche, a habitat is the place where the organism lives, and the niche is the role that they have in their environment, the job that they have. A niche is determined by the tolerance limitations of an organism or limiting factors. A limiting factor is any biotic or abiotic factors that restricts the existence of organisms in a specific environment. So like disease, predators, those would all be limiting factors. And we need something to limit the population, otherwise they would be growing out of control. When we look at feeding relationships, we also mentioned this last year, there are 3 main types of feeding relationships. You can be a producer and a consumer. You can be a predator-prey, parasite to the host. If we look at producer and consumer, producers are all of the plants, and they trap the energy from the sun. They are at the bottom of the food chain. They always start the food chain out. They produce their own food through photosynthesis. Consumers would be like us. We're all autotrophs, or I'm sorry, heterotrophs. They ingest food containing the sun's energy, and they would be your herbivores, which are plant eaters, your carnivores, meat eaters, your omnivores like us. We eat both plants and meat, and decomposers, which break down the remains of dead organisms, and those would be your bacteria and your fungi. And just as another picture of consumers, these are herbivores. They're going to eat plants. They are our primary consumers. We have carnivores next. They're a consumer and they eat meat. They're usually the predators, right? They hunt for their prey. They're scavengers that you would also consider to be carnivores because they do eat meat, but they feed on the dead remains of organisms. And we have omnivores like us, which eat both plants and animals. And consumers, another example is decomposers. They break down the complex compounds of dead and decaying plants and animals into simpler molecules that can be absorbed back into the environment. All right, we're going to stop there.